Hi guys, and welcome to my video tutorial on le passé composé. Le passé composé is one of the main past tense structures used in French and is really important that you know well for your GCSE, especially in terms of your writing and your speaking. Before I begin, I just want to go through a few points with regards to this tutorial. Firstly, the tutorial is actually split into two parts, part 1 and 2. And there will be a chance for you to practice and consolidate your learning at the end of each part with some exercises. Now when this happens, I will ask you to pause the video, and you will notice in the bottom left hand corner of your screen, as you can see now, a pause sign, which means that it's the right time to pause, do the activities, and then when you're ready you can resume the video, and the pause sign will disappear and I'll start going through the feedback for you. The next thing to note is that this is not actually really designed for people that know nothing about the past tense. It's more of a revision or a recap to consolidate your learning on this tense. I will be going through things quite quickly, and the exercises are designed to allow you to practice this tense. And lastly, I will be using my graphics tablet and my pen, and if there's any extra notes that I want to make, just at the bottom here there will be a note section which I'll be writing in to assist you. So let's begin then. So firstly, what is the intention of this tutorial? It's actually designed to just really develop your confidence in using the past tense with both regular and irregular verb structures, so that allows you then to start using that in your writing and in your speaking confidently. So firstly, what is the difference between the past tense structures and, for example, the present tense? Well, the first thing to know is that it's in 3 parts rather than 2. A lot of tenses are in 2 parts. If I just use my pen at the bottom here to show you what I mean. So the present tense I play would be je joue, like that. That's in 2 parts. Je joue, I play. Whereas the past tense structure is actually going to be an extra part in here, which you will see in a minute. So the 3 parts are listed in this grid here. I'm also going to be using different colours just to make it a bit more visual for you, and it just will really emphasise the 3 separate parts. So this first part here is what we call the pronoun. Now the pronoun in French, you should know those are je, which is I, tu, which is you singular, il and elle, which is he and she, nous, which is we, vous, which is you plural, so you all, and the last one is ils and elles. Now it's important to note that this S is not actually pronounced, so it would be il and elle, but just for the sake so that you know there's an S and that you include it in your writing, it's important not to forget that. Right, the second part of the past tense I'm going to, let's put this one in green. And this is what we call grammatically the auxiliary verb. Now I'm just going to write AUX there, but it stands for the auxiliary verb. And the auxiliary verb, another way of thinking of that is like a helper verb, a verb that's needed to form the past tense. And this concept actually does apply in English as well. If we actually look at I have watched, so I have watched TV this morning, let's say. I have watched is the verb structure, I is the pronoun, which would be je, have, now this part is actually what we call the auxiliary verb, yeah? So, and then the last part, watched, is we're going to go on to in a minute. It's called the past participle. So this auxiliary verb is actually very similar in French, that it uses the verb have. And the verb have, the infinitive of the verb have, is avoir. So there's one difference though in French and in English, is that although in English it's only have, but sometimes in French they actually use a different verb, and this is only for a select group of verbs. There's not many verbs, there's about 14 that don't use avoir as their auxiliary verb, and instead they're going to use a different verb, which I'm going to put in another colour. And this verb is actually être. So sometimes, very rarely, there's about 14 verbs, they do not use avoir, they use être instead. However, although there's not a lot, there are some verbs that are really quite important that use this structure. So just starting off with avoir, we firstly need to conjugate that verb. So I'm just going to go back to my green, and we can't just use avoir like this, so we have to conjugate it with the correct pronoun. So avoir with je is j'ai, so it's going to be like that, ai with the apostrophe on that. Tu as, as, il and elle a, nous avons, avons, vous avez, avez, and ils and elles ont, ont. So majority of the verbs are going to be using this structure, this infinitive here, avoir. Some of them will be using être, so it's important that we do know the verb être in terms of forming the past tense. So the verb être is, just to remind you, is je suis, S-U-I-S, tu es, I-S, il and elle est, E-S-T, nous sommes, it's S-O-M-M-E-S, vous êtes, E-T-E-S, with a hat on the E, and ils, elles sont, S-O-N-T. So this is our second part of our verb, which we have to include in French. Moving on to the third part, as we mentioned earlier, in English this would be our third part, the watched bit at the bottom. So I'm just going to use a different colour for this. I'm going to use red, and in red we're going to have what we call the past participle, or PP for short. So the past participle is this part here. So I have, what have you done? I have watched. Now in English, to form that, you would usually add an ed at the end. For example, I have watched, I have played. So it would just simply have that ed. In French, it's going to be slightly different because there's three types of infinitive in French. There's our main type, which is our er verbs, for example, jouer, like that. There's our ir verbs, like finir. And the last type category is our re verbs, like vendre, to sell. Now, when we make our past participle, we're actually going to take this part off the infinitive and we're going to replace it with something else. Now, er verbs, they're going to turn to an e accent, like that. So jouer is going to become jouer with an accent on the e, which now means played. Finir, ir verbs go to just an I, like that. So finished would be fini, like this. And lastly, re verbs, we take off the re and we replace it with a u. So vendre would become vendu, which now means sold, I sold. So we put these these three parts together, and we'll just do some examples down here. So the first thing we're going to take is a pronoun. So let's say I want to say I did something, so I'm going to use je. But I'm going to need J apostrophe because I'm going to then use j'ai, so like that, the second part there. And then I'm going to use a verb, let's say manger. So manger, the verb manger is to eat, and it has an ER on the end. So I find my ER section here. The ER turns to an E accent. So my final verb structure is going to be j'ai mangé, like that. And that translates to I ate, or I have eaten. Okay, let's just do one more example down here. So let's say I want to change the pronoun, the person doing the verb, to we. So I'm going to put nous, the first part here, and I'm going to look at my, we're just doing avoir verbs for the time being, so it's going to be nous avons. And the last, let's try an IR verb, or let's do an IR verb. So we have finished. So we're just going to take off the IR and we're going to add just an I there, and that would mean we have finished. The last thing I want to go through before I give you some exercises to do is this past participle structure. Unfortunately, like a lot of things in French, there are some irregularities, meaning that they don't quite follow this rule. Certain verbs are a bit strange. They just have their own way of doing things, and we have to learn them, really. So these are a list of common verbs that are irregular, and it means that their past participle is not going to follow the normal structure. So avoir, to have, instead of taking off the IR and adding an I, it doesn't do that. That would be wrong. It actually changes to EU, like that. Boire, to drink, is going to change to bu. Dire, which is to say, is going to be dit, D-I-T. Être, which is to be, is going to be été, with 2 accents on the E. And faire is F-A-I-T, like that. And lastly, voir, to see, so I saw would be j'ai vu, not, because obviously there's an IR here, so it wouldn't quite work with this structure. So these are our irregular past participles here. Now, if you ever want to come back to this slide, you can just pause the video and come back to it, and you'll have everything on here. I've actually got, if I move on to this, I've got it here just a bit clearer. If you couldn't read my handwriting, I've got it on the computer, so you can always pause it on this thing, and it has all the information here. In terms of the être verbs here, don't worry too much about that. We're going to go through that in the second part of this tutorial. For now, we're just focusing on the AI, avoir parts. So this is the part for you to have a go at practicing some exercises. So here we go, just to go through it. This is one exercise for you. We've got, in bold, we've got 2 possibilities for each question. I just want you to think about which possible one it would be in the past tense, and you can either write it or just in your head what you think it might be. So now's the time to, and then if you finish that and you want something extra to do, you can think about what they actually mean as well, so the translation of those into English. So this is a chance for you to pause the video and have a go at those exercises. Right, so welcome back. We're just going to go run through the answers to this one. And give you some feedback on it. So, as we know before, this is the infinitive of the verb, so this can't be this one. This is the past participle. So in number 1, j'ai mangé du poulet is the correct answer. And if you want to know the translation, that means I ate some chicken. So I'll go through the translation directly after. Nous avez or nous avons. Now, avez goes with the vous form, so avons is our correct answer here. And it's we ate some rice. Moving on to question 3, we've got 3 options. This is the infinitive, so it can't be this one. Fini is, we don't need a T on there because it's not irregular, so it's just going to be elles ont fini le leçon, which means they finished the lesson. Number 4, we've got vous êtes, vous avez, and vous avons. Now this is the être verb. It doesn't take être, it takes avoir. This goes with nous, so we actually want the one that's going to go with vous, the pronoun. And this is you all. You plural ate some bread. Number 5, now we've got 2 parts that we have to choose. Is it tu as a s or tu as without the s? It's with the s because it's with the tu form, and it's the middle one here. We take off the re and we add a u for re verbs, and that is you sold the car. La voiture means car. Nous avons, nous avez. Well, we know that it's nous avons, so ons. And this one here is an irregular verb, so it's not fut, it's not fait. That would be a regular structure. It's actually its own structure, F-A-I-T for this one. Nous avons fait de la danse. So we did some dancing. And that's a roundup of that task for you. Moving on to your second task, which is a little bit more complex, which allows you to actually write the verbs. Just quickly go through the example, and then we'll give you a chance to pause the video. So it's quite straightforward. You just got 2 gaps in each question. The first gap's going to be your auxiliary verb. The pronoun's already there for you, and the second gap's going to be your past participle. In brackets here, you have the verb in its infinitive form, so that needs to be conjugated into the past tense. For example, tu, we had 2 gaps there. Jouer au foot, so this is an ER verb. It takes avoir, like all of these verbs, they take avoir. So tu as, as, and jouer, J-O-U-E, accent au foot would be the correct answer for that. If you want to translate them as well, that's another extension task that you can do. So now's your chance to pause the video and have a go at that exercise. Right, so just to lastly go through this and see how you got on, I'm going to put my pointer on and it will be marking in red. So the first one is the pronoun is je, so we look at our table and it's actually going to be j'ai, A-I, and we take the ER and we replace it with E accent. So it becomes j'ai mangé du poulet, which in English would be I ate some chicken. Number 2 is elle. Now the pronoun's changed here, so it can't be AI here. It has to be conjugated with avoir, so it's AI, AS, A. The third conjugation down is A. So elle a joué. Take off the ER, add the E with an accent. Elle a joué au foot. She played football. Number 3, nous. So we've changed the pronoun to nous. And the verb is an RE verb this time, so our nous conjugation with avoir is nous avons, and take off the RE and replace it with a U, so it's nous avons vendu la voiture, we sold the car. Now we've come to a bit of a barrier here. We don't actually have a pronoun anymore, so when this is the case, it's because it's been replaced by a subject or a person. So ma mère actually means my mum. So if you were to think who would that be? I, you, he, she, we, or they? My mum would be she. So my mum goes to the shop, she goes to the shop. It's the same. So I'm just going to write elle above that. That is the equivalent of elle. So if that's the equivalent of elle, then here we're going to have a. Elle a. Ma mère a. I are verb, so we're going to replace that I are with an I. Ma mère a fini le livre. My mum finished the book. Now, faire has got a star. That tends to mean that it's an irregular verb. So we just need to bear that in mind. Now, il, so this is going to be on, ils ont. And be careful with this one. It's not fait, it's fait, F-A-I-T, la voiture. They made the car, that would be. Ma mère et moi, again, we've got a slight complication. There's no subject, so we need to think, if this was a pronoun, what would it be? My mum and I, my mum and me. So my mum and I is no longer she, it turns into we, because I'm included in that group. So my mum and I would be we, which in French is the equivalent, is nous. So if we think about nous, this is going to go with that. So our auxiliary verb is avant. So ma mère et moi avant. Now boire is also irregular. It goes to bu du café. So it's my mum and I drank some coffee. And lastly, now I've actually said do it in the negative here. I haven't gone through the negative, so we'll just do it in the normal positive. And it is irregular, so vous avez dit. It's an irregular verb, so it's dit for that one. And that means you all, or you plural, said. Yeah. The truth, la vérité at the end is the truth. Great, so I hope you've learnt a lot from that. I hope you've done well in those tasks and that you understand what, if you did make a mistake, it's not a problem. It's just so you know where you went wrong, so that in future you you hopefully won't make that mistake again. That's the end of the first part of this tutorial. I hope you join me again for the second part, where we'll be going through the verbs that take être in the past, and a few differences with those verbs in terms of how to form it as well.